What's going on, Skullbrains? It's time to find out how our trio survived the icy storm in the next issue of The Ancestral Trail.
When he, who is the chosen one, shall tread upon the ancient path and battle there to overcome
the forces of the dark.
The Ancestral Trail, an epic story of myths, magic, and monsters. Book 21. Stridor, Lord of the Snowy Mountains, facing up to the White Death.
Yes, in the last episode, our heroes made it into Frigoria, only to be captured by the mighty giant Spector. After Richard uses his invisibility cloak to destroy Spector's only eyeball, the three make a run for it with the blinded giant close on their heels. However, Orkin delivers Spector's fatal blow with his sword, thus freeing the trapped water mammals of the ancestral world. The companions continue on towards their next Life Force pod, only to be overcome by a treacherous snowstorm. So let's get into the next issue and see how they survive. But before we do, let's go over the Ancestral Challenge for this week. You'll need to find Shumi and Shubi, and somewhere in the illustrations is a hidden fragment of the Evil One's mask. Stick around to the end of the episode and I will reveal the answers. In the pinned comment below, you'll find a link to download this issue's monsters and magic cards. Have a read and see if you think if Stridor is based on Atlas or Bigfoot. Leave a comment below with your thoughts and I'll reveal the answer in the next episode. As for Spector, if you guessed he was based on Cyclops, you were correct. Okay, are you ready? Let's do this.
On the 21st day, tread lightly on the rocky heights. A sudden fall, a triple plight. An evil comes, an evil goes, buried under sliding snow. Remember, though, when far ahead, trapped is not the same as dead. Nor is haste the same as speed, nor the led the one to lead.
On through the snow the trio battled, barely able to see in front of them. We're caught in a blizzard! We've got to get to the mountains as quickly as possible and get some shelter, Richard said, his lips numb with cold. If we stay in the open, we're dead! They stumbled on with renewed purpose, but when they reached the mountains, their progress became slower. The valleys were choked with deep snowdrifts. Let's rope up! Richard shouted. The blizzard redoubled in intensity. It growled and thundered forward like an elemental beast, pressing down on them with the full weight of masses of airborne ice and snow. Richard had just traversed a particularly treacherous slope, and Orkin was halfway across when the scribe lost his footing and slid downhill. The sudden jerk on the rope pulled both Orkin and Richard off their feet. They scrabbled for a handhold, but it was no use. They followed their companion in a headlong, downhill slide, until their descent was stopped abruptly by a deep snowdrift. Ouch! Melik groaned as first Orkin and then Richard landed on top of him. There's no point carrying on in these conditions, Orkin said. We better wait here for things to improve. Let's look for some shelter. The others looked doubtful as Orkin strode round the snowdrift. The snow had piled onto a large boulder, and, behind it, a crack split the mountainside. The three scrambled in out of the storm and found themselves in a narrow passage. Without hesitation, Orkin led the way into the mountain. The stone corridor opened out onto a stark, jagged dome. The walls and floor of the cave shone under a thick coat of ice and, Melik noticed with a shudder, several partly devoured carcasses had been left lying around on natural stone shelves. Let's have a look at the Book of Prophecies while we wait for the storm to die down, Richard said. Then we must press on. Malik unstrapped the book and read out the mysterious lines. "Well, the triple plight is clear enough," Richard said, "but I can't make sense of the last 3 lines. It's a warning of some kind, though." Malik shrugged and shouldered the book again. While they had been discussing the riddle, the storm had abated. When they came out of the cave, they saw slopes of virgin snow that shone in weak sunlight. Everything was still and calm. After the fury of the blizzard, it all seemed quite unreal. For a moment they had the impression that they were alone in a new and pristine world. Then, echoing through the silence, came a deep howl. "What was that?" Richard asked. "Malik, do you know of anything living in this area from your books?"
"Well, it could be a large snowcat, or it could be something worse," the scribe said with a grim look on his face. "I once came across a reference to a creature called Stridor, who lives in the snowy mountains. He's believed to be the missing link between apes and mankind. He guards the way to the Forgotten City."
"Something tells me we've stumbled into his larder," Orkin grumbled. "We'd better get away as quickly as we can." A second howl, plaintive and cold, scoured the hillside. The companions froze motionless outside the entrance to the cave. The howl came again, but this time it was closer. Richard peered into the distance. Far below, he could see a thick-set, furry creature coming up the hill towards them. It was round-bodied, with long arms and powerful legs, all covered in a furs of straight, brown hair. A large deer was slung across its powerful shoulders. As it approached, Richard saw that the creature's face was strikingly human, rubbery and wrinkled into dark, clean-edged segments. Now and then the creature stopped and sniffed the air, his gaping nostrils quivering as they pointed in Richard's direction. "I think Malik could be right," Richard said. "This must be Stridor. We've got to get away from here." The 3 hurled themselves forward without hesitation. The new snow was deep and sticky. The 3 floundered waist-deep in drifts, freeing themselves only to find their legs encased in heavy white gaiters. Stridor, on the other hand, was in his element, and his furry legs moved through the snow with ease. Richard's main aim had been to gain height. If they headed downhill, Stridor would have caught them easily. Now the new fall of snow had changed the landscape, creating cliffs and overhangs that had not been there before, and had been invisible from below. Richard fumbled in his pocket and drew out the Pathfinder. The glassy surface caught the pale sunlight, and before he could point it anywhere, Stridor was upon him. With a terrible grunt, the creature seized the instrument and gazed at his prize in fascination. Richard flew into action. This was no time for fear or calculations. Without the Pathfinder, they would never find their way out of the mountains. He took out Jarut's dagger and rolled over in the snow until he was within striking distance of the mountain creature. Stridor gave a fierce howl as the blade sank deep into his foot and the Pathfinder flew into the air. In the same instant as Richard caught the instrument, Stridor sprang up in pain, his cry echoing back and forth until the mountains rang like a tuning fork. The sound rose and fell until it touched a frequency that was familiar to the fragile precipice. The uppermost lip began to crumble. Then, in one pelting rush, the whole mountain slumped into avalanche. Richard, Orkin, and Malik were swept off their feet by the snow. Even Stridor was bowled over as boulders and trees hurtled past at colossal speed. The 3 were carried helplessly to the bottom of the mountain. When the avalanche had finally run its course, they were buried under an untold depth of snow. Richard found himself in what seemed to be a freezing coffin. He clawed frantically at snow in front of his face and dug his way in the direction he hoped was up. The snow was loosely packed and soon he was in the open, gasping for air in his clogged nostrils and mouth. To his right he saw a shoe lying on the ground. He gave it a tug and found it was attached to Malik's leg. After a little while he managed to uncover the spluttering scribe, who had been buried upside down. There was no sign of Orkin anywhere. Richard and Malik scanned the landscape in vain for signs of movement. "Watch out!" Malik cried suddenly. A sword had lanced upwards through the snow, narrowly missing Richard's foot. He stepped hastily to one side and watched as Orkin cut his way to freedom. Rub your faces," Richard muttered through chattering teeth. "We must get our circulation going." Their hands and faces were almost blue. "We better get going again," Orkin said after a while. "But which way should we head?" That way," Richard replied, checking the Pathfinder. There, beyond the snowy mountains, the three could see the ochre slabs of lower, more hospitable hills. "Stridor must have been buried in the avalanche, but he might have survived," Richard said. "If he has, we must pray that he won't leave his mountain home." The companions fell into line and made their way towards the valley. They remained alert, ready to run if they heard or saw anything that suggested Stridor might be on their trail once again. None of them felt safe until they reached the end of the valley. Then below them they saw the browns and yellows of a world that was not immersed in perpetual winter. Beyond the snowy mountains lay a series of jagged hills. Here and there, small fields had been carved out of the hillsides. Clumps of yellowing pasture intruded on the woodland. In one place, they could see a bridge that had once spanned a precipitous mountain river. Further along, clustering below several small hills, the trio thought they could make out the neat outlines of many buildings. They trudged down the slopes, crossed the snow line, and entered the pastures they had glimpsed from above. The grass was long and golden, fenced off by a disintegrating line of oak rails. Then they came to it. A whole city hidden between the hills.
"Oh, it must be the Forgotten City,"
Melik said. The three entered a city of architectural wonder. Buildings were made of finely chiseled blocks of stone that fitted together without mortar, with such artistry that it would have been impossible to slide a knife blade between their joints. They wandered through the streets, but nowhere could they see a sign of life. The doors they opened led either onto empty rooms or revealed heaped piles of skulls. Richard had the feeling that death underlay all. It was easy to see how the city had fallen to the Evil One. It had no outer walls, suggesting that its inhabitants had been peaceable people, with no fear of attack. The streets were wide open, the buildings large windowed and open-faced. This had once been a welcoming place. "There's nothing here for us," Richard said after a while. "I'll check the Pathfinder again." The instrument glowed gold when Richard pointed it at one of the peaks that rose high above the city. "The pod is somewhere up there," Richard said, dreading the thought of another hard trek. As they started to climb, the three felt mounting apprehension. In the pasture lay the skeletons of cattle, their desiccated hides stretched tight over white bones. The Evil One's influence extended even to this remote spot. Then the fields that surrounded the city gave way to slides of shale, studded with the occasional wind-blasted tree. The air became thinner, the sun harsher, and soon the three companions were feeling exhausted. They had almost reached the top when they heard a howl. It came to them from a distance, but was nevertheless recognizable as Stridor's angry call. The three turned round. Far away they saw a figure coming down the snowy heights they had left earlier. The Forgotten City's guardian had survived the avalanche. "Trapped is not the same as dead," Richard muttered. They quickened their pace and reached the summit. Beyond lay another deep valley. It was brown with dust, and a soaring pyramid was set in its center. Richard pointed the Pathfinder towards the structure. "Well, that's where we've got to go," Richard said. The ground made for easy walking. The hillside was covered with rock that had been worn smooth into a series of flat plates. Melik bounded excitedly past Richard and Orkin. "No!" Richard shouted, remembering the last line of verse. "Stop! Don't go any further!" It was too late. Melik landed with a thump on a slab of rock. There came a rumble from underground, and then the rock tilted forward at the command of some hidden mechanism. Where there had been a comfortable slope, there was now a jumbled slide. Melik gave a cry of surprise, then lost his footing. Richard and Orkin could only watch as their companion plummeted out of sight. And that is the end of issue number 21. So, how did you go with the Ancestral Challenge? Shumi and Shubi appeared twice, once on page 330 and again on page 335. As for the fragment of the Evil One's mask, well, that was here on page 323 in the Wall of the Snow. In this issue, there were no letter tokens or map pieces to collect. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please hit that like and subscribe button and ring the little bell icon to be notified of when the next issue is released. And until then, as always, stay tuned and stay skull-brained.